The sun had barely set, yet the village square pulsed with firelight and cruel anticipation. Drums pounded in uneven rhythm, each strike echoing like the beating of a restless heart. Children crowded at the edges, whispering and giggling, while their elders stood grim-faced, feeding the frenzy with their silence. At the center of it all, a young woman of 19 was dragged forward, her wrists bound with woven rope. Dust clung to her bare feet as she stumbled, her face pale with dread. She did not cry out, though her eyes searched the crowd as if still hoping for one familiar face, one voice to speak in her defense. None came. Her stepsister led the way, tall and proud, her hair wrapped in bright cloth that glowed red in the torchlight. The smirk on her lips betrayed satisfaction. She was the architect of this cruelty, the one who had whispered lies into the ears of the elders, who had stirred gossip until it became a storm. Now she carried a clay pot filled with thick black paint, its oily surface gleaming under the flames. "She carries the shadow of curses," the stepsister declared, her voice carrying over the drums. "Tonight we mark her for what she truly is, a ghost among us." A ripple of approval passed through the villagers. Some clapped. Others shouted. Children picked up the chant, their shrill voices cutting the night. "Ghost! Ghost! Ghost!" The young woman's lips trembled, but she did not speak. Instead, she lowered her head as the stepsister dipped her fingers into the pot. The paint was cold, almost alive, and it dripped slowly as the first streak was dragged across the girl's forehead. The crowd gasped, then laughed. Another streak followed, down her cheek, across her nose, smearing her skin until her features blurred beneath the blackness. She winced but did not resist. For every streak, the stepsister grew more vicious, pressing harder, smearing more. Soon, the girl's entire face was covered, shiny and black as midnight, only her eyes visible, wide, glistening, silently pleading. The drummers pounded faster. The crowd shouted louder. "Ghost! Curse! Shame!" Tears welled at the edges of her eyes, cutting thin silver paths through the paint, but even those trails were quickly smeared over as the stepsister dipped her whole hand into the pot and dragged it across the girl's face with brutal satisfaction. Humiliation burned hotter than fire. Every laugh, every jeer was a knife. The young woman felt her dignity stripped away, not just by her stepsister's hand, but by the village that had once known her laughter, her kindness, her weaving that had brightened their homes. Now none of that mattered. The lie had won. At last, the stepsister stepped back, raising the nearly empty pot above her head. "Behold," she cried. "The cursed one wears her true skin." The crowd erupted. Some danced mockingly around the girl. Children clapped ash-covered hands. A few elders shook their heads but did not intervene. The young woman stood in silence, her face heavy with paint, her breath shallow. Shame wrapped around her like a shroud. And above them all, unseen by the crowd, storm clouds were gathering. The drums beat on. The laughter roared. But the night itself had begun to listen. Before the night of shaming, before the drums and laughter, there had always been envy. The young woman had grown in beauty and grace, her kindness known to every hut. She rose with the sun, fetching water for the elders, tending to the fire when others slept, weaving bright cloths that shimmered with color. Her laughter was soft but carried far, a sound that brought comfort to children and warmth to those who worked the fields. Even strangers passing through the village remembered her gentle greeting, her quiet strength. But for her stepsister, each smile, each word of praise, was a thorn. The stepsister, though adorned in fine cloths and jewels her mother insisted she wear, could not match the natural glow of the younger girl. Where she forced her laughter, the younger girl's joy rang true. Where she tried to charm, the younger girl's kindness won hearts without effort. Envy grew in silence, feeding on every comparison. And envy, when left to fester, becomes poison. It began as whispers. Quiet, deliberate, breathed into the ears of neighbors around the fires at night. "Did you notice? When she smiles, children fall sick the next day." Others would frown, uncertain. But the stepsister's voice carried conviction. Her shadow crossed the field, and the yams withered. "Have you not seen? The goats avoid her, as though they sense what we cannot." Each lie was small but carefully placed, like seeds pushed into fertile soil. And the season itself gave her whisper strength. For that year the rains had faltered. The earth cracked under the sun. Leaves curled brown, harvests failed, and hunger crept into every household. The villagers, desperate for someone to blame, began to turn their fearful eyes toward the innocent one. "She came near my house," a woman murmured. "The next day my baby coughed through the night. I saw her shadow stretch across the granary," a man added. And the very next morning the roof collapsed. The more they spoke, the more they believed. And the stepsister fanned the flames with a smile that hid her triumph. When the young woman offered water to a neighbor, the neighbor recoiled. When she brought woven cloth as a gift, the family burned it at the edge of the village. Children, once eager to follow her, now hid behind their mother's skirts, whispering curse, curse as she passed. The girl noticed the change. She felt the stares, the coldness and voices that once welcomed her. She lowered her head, kept to her tasks, and prayed the season of hardship would pass. But in silence, the stepsister was weaving a net of lies that no prayer alone could undo. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, the stepsister's voice rang out clear. She stood before a group of elders, her mother at her side, and declared with boldness, "Her smile brings misfortune. Her shadow kills the harvest. Do you not see? She walks with spirits." The elders, weary from hunger and fear, did not argue. A few muttered in agreement. And though one or two looked uncertain, no one dared to defend the accused. The seed of envy had grown into a tree of suspicion, and its roots were already strangling the village. And so, when the drought deepened and another child fell ill, the villagers no longer looked to the sky for answers. They looked at her. At the girl who had done no wrong. At the girl whose only crime was being loved too easily and hated too deeply. The stepsister's smile that night was sharp as a blade. She knew her work was nearly done. The night of judgment came beneath a blood-red sunset, when the drums began to pound and the villagers gathered in the square. Torches burned high, their smoke twisting into the sky as if to summon the spirits themselves. The air smelled of dust and sweat, and in that suffocating atmosphere, fear dressed itself as courage, and cruelty masked itself as tradition. At the center of it all stood the young woman. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, her eyes lowered, though she could not hide the trembling of her body. The villagers formed a circle around her, shouting, jeering, calling her names she had never deserved. "Ghost," one cried. "Curse," another spat. And the chorus grew, echoing louder than the drums, a tide of hatred crashing over her. It was the stepsister who led them. She stepped forward, her face lit by torchlight, twisted with triumph. In her hands she carried a clay bowl filled with thick black paint, made from soot and oils, sticky and heavy. She lifted it high for all to see, her voice ringing out over the chants. "This one walks with shadows," she declared. "She carries misfortune in her very breath. Tonight we mark her for what she is. No longer one of us, but a ghost among the living." The crowd roared in approval, stomping their feet against the earth. Dust rose like smoke, swallowing the girl's sobs. The stepsister dipped her fingers into the bowl, thick with blackness, and pressed them hard against the girl's forehead. The paint spread in streaks, dripping down over her brow, down her cheeks, across her lips. The young woman shuddered, her tears mixing with the oily paste, but she did not resist. "Ghost!" the villagers shouted. The stepsister dipped her whole hand into the bowl this time, smearing the black across the girl's face in cruel strokes, painting her nose, her chin, until her features were almost gone, erased beneath the mask of soot. Children pointed and laughed. Elders nodded grimly as though this humiliation were justice. Again and again she was marked. Fingers and palms rubbed the paint into her skin, grinding it into every line and curve. With each stroke, the girl felt the weight of shame grow heavier, as though they were stripping her of her humanity and remaking her into the monster they believed her to be. Ghost. Curse. Shame. The voices rose louder, stronger, until the words shook the night. The drums pounded like war, their rhythm syncing with her racing heart. The girl's tears slid silently, carving pale rivers through the black on her face. Her lips quivered, but she made no sound. Her silence was her only shield, though even that was mocked. "See how she says nothing," someone shouted. "Even the cursed know when their guilt is revealed." The stepsister leaned close, her breath hot against the girl's ear. "Now everyone will see you as I do," she whispered. "Not beautiful. Not kind. Nothing but a shadow." The girl closed her eyes, praying not for herself but for the strength to endure. Somewhere deep within, beneath the layers of humiliation, a spark remained untouched. She felt it flicker, faint but alive, as if waiting. When at last the bowl was empty, the stepsister lifted her hands to show the crowd. Her palms were smeared black, glistening in the torchlight. She raised them like trophies, and the villagers cheered, stamping their feet until the ground itself seemed to quake. The girl stood there, her face entirely masked in darkness, the paint dripping down her neck, her chest. She looked less like a person now, more like a figure carved from shadow. The crowd laughed at the sight, convinced they had turned her into the ghost they feared. But as the laughter rose, so too did the storm clouds gathering overhead. The air grew heavy, the torches hissed in the wind, and the night seemed to listen. They thought they had shamed her. They thought they had finished the work of cruelty. But the paint had not yet chosen where it truly belonged. The drums fell silent at last, but the echoes of their cruelty lingered in the square like smoke. The girl stood trembling in the center, her face slick with the heavy black paint, her eyes nearly lost beneath its smothering sheen. The torches burned low, casting long shadows that stretched toward her, as though even the fire itself wanted to mock her. "Go," someone shouted. "A ghost does not belong among the living." Another voice joined. "Send her into the night. Let the spirits take her." The stepsister smiled, her blackened hands still sticky with the paint, and lifted her chin in satisfaction. With a sharp wave of her arm, she ordered them to cast the girl out. And so they did. With jeers and curses, they shoved her toward the edge of the square, until her bare feet stumbled against the dusty ground and carried her unwillingly away. Her tears made pale tracks down her cheeks, but no matter how they fell, the blackness of the paint refused to fade. She wiped at her face with her bound hands, but it smeared deeper, soaking into her skin as if it belonged there. The more she struggled, the darker she seemed to become. The crowd followed her with their eyes until she crossed the last row of huts. No one dared touch her now. Children huddled against their mothers, frightened by the way she looked in the torchlight, less like the girl they once knew, more like a shadow walking upright. At the edge of the village she paused, her chest heaving. Behind her, the villagers stood in a crooked line, their faces twisted in mockery and fear. She searched for one kind gaze, one flicker of mercy, but found only the stepsister's smirk shining like a scar against the night. A stone struck the earth near her foot. Then another. "Leave," a man shouted. "Do not return." The girl turned away, her breath ragged, and stumbled into the dark. The night air was cool, damp with the scent of rain, but the weight of the paint clung to her like fire, choking and heavy. She walked blindly, her legs trembling beneath her, until the soft sound of water reached her ears. The river. She fell to her knees at its bank, dipping her hands into the current, scooping water onto her face. The cold bit her skin, but when she pulled her hands away, the paint remained. She tried again, scrubbing harder, letting the water spill over her cheeks, her lips, her chin. But the oily black clung tighter, spreading further, as though mocking her effort. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her reflection in the water showed not the face she had known, but a mask of darkness staring back, eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She plunged her face into the river, desperate, holding herself beneath the surface until her lungs burned. When she rose, gasping, the water around her rippled black, yet her skin was unchanged. The paint had become part of her, fused with her flesh like a curse. Her hands shook violently as she pressed them to her face. She wanted to scream, to tear it away, but her voice was lost to the wind. Above her, the clouds thickened, the moon veiled in shadow. She staggered back from the river, leaving wet footprints on the soil, her body trembling. The paint glistened on her face like armor, and in that darkness, something inside her shifted. She did not know yet what it meant, only that she could no longer wash away what had been forced upon her. The village was behind her now. Before her stretched only night, deep and endless. She vanished into it, a figure marked, swallowed by shadows, but not broken. The moon climbed high, casting its pale light across the village roofs. The laughter of the crowd had long faded, leaving only the sound of crickets and the distant croak of frogs by the river. In her hut, the stepsister sat hunched over a clay bowl of water, her breath sharp and uneven. She dipped her hands into the bowl and scrubbed hard. The black paint, smeared thick on her palms and under her nails, should have rinsed away easily. It was the same paint she had crushed from soot and oil only hours before. But now, as her fingers clawed at her skin, the paint clung stubbornly as though alive. The water in the bowl turned dark, yet her hands remained stained. "Come off," she hissed, rubbing harder, her nails scraping against her skin until it burned. She poured the dirty water outside, fetched another bowl and tried again. Still, the marks remained, black streaks across her palms, seeping into the lines of her fingers. Her heart thudded. This was not possible. By the third attempt, the water no longer even clouded when she plunged her hands in. The stain seemed to have sunk beneath her skin, woven into her flesh. No matter how violently she rubbed, the black grew deeper, spreading from her palms to her wrists like roots seeking soil. A chill crept through her chest. She wrapped her hands in cloth, hiding them, but the fabric grew damp with the smell of ash and oil. The harder she pressed, the stronger the scent became. From the corner of the hut, her mother stirred. "Child," she murmured sleepily, "why do you scratch at the night like a rat in a basket?" The stepsister froze, afraid to reveal her hands. "Nothing, Mama. My skin feels dirty. I am only washing." Her mother yawned and turned back to sleep, but the girl's eyes would not close. She sat in the dark, staring at her cursed hands, trembling with a fear she could not name. Outside the wind rose. A low howl swept through the huts, rattling doors and stirring the ashes of dying fires. Somewhere beyond, by the river, the outcast girl walked alone, her face still streaked in black, her tears mixing with the paint. And in the stepsister's hut, the stain continued its quiet work. The lines of her hands darkened as though ink had spilled into her very veins. She tried again to cover them with cloth, but the black seeped through, smudging the fabric. When she finally slept, her dreams were filled with hands, dozens of them reaching, grasping, pulling. All were stained the same black as her own. By dawn, the villagers would whisper that she looked pale, that her fingers twitched as though possessed. But she dared not tell them the truth, that the paint she used to shame her sister had not stayed upon the sister's face. It had chosen her instead. The river ran quiet beneath the moon, its silver surface rippling gently against the reeds. Yet for those who lived in the huts nearest its banks, the night was not quiet at all. It began with a sound, soft, almost too faint to notice. A sobbing carried by the wind as though a woman wept beneath the water. At first, the villagers dismissed it as the cry of night birds, or the hiss of reeds swaying in the current. But the sobbing did not fade. It rose and fell, ragged like a broken heart. An old fisherman stirred in his sleep, his dreams disturbed by the sound. He awoke, thinking perhaps a child had wandered too close to the river. But when he stepped outside, he saw no one, only the water glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. Then he saw it. Her reflection. The shamed girl's face, blackened with paint, floated just beneath the surface. Her eyes were wide, glistening with tears, her lips trembling with sorrow. Yet the water remained still, undisturbed by her presence. The fisherman gasped, stumbling back. His cry woke his wife, who came running with a lamp. When she looked into the river, she too froze. There, for a breathless moment, the girl's painted face hovered on the water's skin. Then the ripples broke it apart, scattering her image into black streaks that swirled like ink in the current. By morning, whispers had already spread. The fisherman and his wife swore what they saw, their voices shaking with fear. Others laughed nervously, claiming they had heard it too, the sound of weeping as though the river itself had taken pity on the cursed girl. But by the second night, no one was laughing. Children fetching water at dusk swore they saw her shadow in the river, though when they turned, the banks were empty. A young mother dropped her calabash when the reflection looking back at her was not her own but the blackened face of the outcast, tears rolling endlessly down. "The river keeps her," some muttered. "The river punishes us," others said. And then came the voice. Soft, almost like the murmur of moving water, but clear enough that those who listened closely could hear words hidden in the current. "The stain is yours now." It carried from bank to bank, from hut to hut, crawling into ears and hearts. The more the villagers denied it, the louder it seemed to whisper. One child, frightened, asked his mother, "Why does the river say that?" The woman slapped him quickly, ordering silence, but her own hands trembled as she scrubbed them against her skirt. For even she had joined in smearing the girl with ashes, laughing as the stepsister painted her face black. And now, when she touched the water, her fingertips came away darkened, faint smudges that no washing could remove. That night, no one slept soundly. The sobbing echoed against the banks. Dogs barked and whined, refusing to drink from the river. Shadows seemed longer, heavier. And always, beneath it all, the whisper rose and fell like a chant. "The stain is yours now." The stepsister woke in the middle of the night, her throat dry, her body restless. The fire in her hut had burned low, casting shadows that stretched like long fingers across the walls. She rubbed her eyes, then froze. Her hands. The black paint that had stained her palms the night before was no longer confined to her skin. It had crept higher, curling around her wrists like shackles, seeping into the lines of her flesh. She clawed at it with her nails, scraping until her skin burned raw, but the paint would not fade. Instead, it seemed alive, glistening wet as though freshly applied. Her scream carried into the square. Neighbors rushed to her door, holding torches, muttering in alarm. When she stumbled out, clutching her arms, they saw the stains themselves, spreading like dark veins up toward her elbows. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "She's cursed. It's the girl's spirit." "No, it's the paint. It clings to whoever touched it." At those words several villagers recoiled. One woman glanced at her own palms, then gasped. Black smudges, faint but undeniable, marred her skin. She had been among those who jeered, who shoved the girl forward, laughing as ashes rained over her. Another man lifted his hand to the torchlight. His fingertips were dark, almost bruised-looking. One by one others began to notice. Marks along the palms, streaks beneath the nails, faint stains on wrists. Some tried to rub them away on their clothes. Others ran toward the river with bowls and gourds, plunging their hands into the water, scrubbing until their skin bled. But the more they washed, the deeper the stains seemed to sink. By dawn, panic gripped the village. Men muttered angrily that the curse had spread to them all. Mothers clutched their children, checking tiny hands for black spots. A council elder, shaking with fear, declared that this was no ordinary shame but a punishment sent by the ancestors. "It was her face we painted," he whispered. "But it is our hands that carry it now." The stepsister sat apart from them, rocking back and forth, her arms wrapped in cloth to hide the stains. Yet she could feel it beneath the wrappings, cool, damp, alive. At times, she swore the paint pulsed faintly, as though a second heartbeat throbbed under her skin. By nightfall, the entire village was restless. Fires burned low, dogs whimpered and refused food, and no one dared go near the river. For in the distance, the sobbing had returned, rolling with the sound of the current. And beneath that sobbing, the whisper came again, soft, steady, inescapable. "The stain is yours now." The villagers could not tell if the sound rose from the river, the wind, or their own guilty hearts. But as the black smudges deepened on their skin, they knew the truth. The shame they forced on one girl had returned to all of them. The curse was spreading. The village sank into uneasy silence as night fell. Fires burned low, their smoke drifting like restless spirits between the huts. No drums played. No laughter broke the air. Only the groan of wood and the nervous shuffle of feet echoed in the darkness. But the silence did not last. It began with a child's cry. A boy, no more than 5, wailed from his mother's arms, pointing toward the doorway. She turned and gasped, for there, framed in the faint glow of moonlight, was a face. The girl's face. Her features were blurred by black paint, yet her eyes shone through hollow sockets filled with sorrow, burning faintly as though lit from within. The mother screamed, clutching her child, and when others rushed in, the face was gone. Only a black smear, damp and shining, remained on the wood of the doorframe. Word spread quickly, carried on whispers like wind through tall grass. Some said they saw her at the edge of the square, standing beneath the baobab tree, her face gleaming faintly in the dark. Others swore she appeared in the reflection of water bowls, hovering above the ripples, watching. And always the eyes. Empty yet unrelenting. At midnight the first knock came. 3 slow, heavy raps echoed against the door of the hut belonging to one of the men who had jeered the loudest. He held his breath, clutching his spear, but did not move. The knock came again, louder this time. Trembling, he pushed the door open with the tip of his weapon, only to find no one outside. But on the wood, where his hand touched, black paint spread like spilled ink. He scrubbed at it until his knuckles bled. The mark did not fade. By the second night, more knocks came. One by one, the villagers lay awake, listening, dreading the sound. When it came, it was always the same, slow, deliberate, filled with weight. Each hut that heard the knock bore the same stain afterward, black handprints smearing the doors, fingers long and twisted, as though the paint itself had left its touch. The stepsister was not spared. She awoke to the sound of tapping, faint at first, then urgent, pressing against her door. Her heart hammered as she pulled the mat aside just enough to see through the crack. There she was. The girl stood in the moonlight, her face dripping with the same black paint she had been shamed with. It glistened as though still wet, running down her cheeks like streams of tar. Her lips never moved, but her eyes bore into her stepsister's soul, hollow yet alive, glowing with the sorrow of every humiliation. The stepsister stumbled back, choking on her own scream. When she dared to look again, the doorway was empty. But across the wood, dark smudges stretched where fingers had dragged slowly downward, leaving marks no washing could erase. Soon no hut was untouched. Every door bore the stains. Every family heard the knocking. Some villagers tried to flee into the night, running toward the fields, but they returned by dawn, their bodies streaked with paint they had never touched. Others tried to light fires to chase her away, but the flames sputtered, as though the air itself had grown heavy with ash. And always the face appeared. Sometimes at the river. Sometimes in the square. Sometimes pressed against a window in the dead of night. The girl they mocked was gone, but her face, painted, sorrowful, unyielding, had become the village's shadow. By the third night no one slept. They sat awake, whispering prayers, listening for the sound they all dreaded yet knew would come. 3 slow knocks. Pause. And the mark of black hands upon their doors. Sleep no longer came to the stepsister. She lay awake each night, trembling, her ears straining for the dreaded sound of knocks. But what haunted her most was not the sound outside, it was the silence inside her hut, thick and pressing, broken only by her own shallow breath. On the 4th night, she tried to comfort herself by lighting a small fire in a clay pot. The flames cast unsteady shadows across the walls. She reached for the gourd of water she kept beside her mat, hoping to wet her lips, dry from endless fear. But when she leaned over the bowl, her breath caught. The reflection staring back at her was not her own. Her face in the water was blackened, dripping with the same paint she had smeared on her stepsister's cheeks. Her eyes were hollow voids, burning faintly with sorrow and anger. The painted face smiled, a slow, terrible grin, though her real lips had not moved. The stepsister shrieked and pushed the bowl away, spilling water across the floor. But even as the liquid spread, the black face shimmered in the puddle, following her with its stare. Then came the voice. Soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. You painted me ghost. The stepsister froze, her heart hammering. Now ghost you shall be. The words echoed in the walls, vibrating in her chest, as though the hut itself had spoken. She clawed at her own face, scrubbing with her palms as if to wipe away paint that wasn't there. Yet when she looked at her hands, her skin was stained, black smears crawling across her fingers, sinking beneath her nails. No, she wailed, stumbling to her feet. She stumbled outside, clutching her burning hands, desperate for air. The night was heavy, the moon veiled by clouds, but she could feel eyes on her from every direction. Her neighbors peered from their huts, wide-eyed, but none dared to step forward. They whispered among themselves, clutching their children, pointing at the black marks spreading up her arms. Some wept softly. Some turned away. The stepsister staggered toward the river, her body shaking. She fell to her knees at the bank, plunging her arms into the cold water, scrubbing until her skin bled. The current swirled black around her wrists, but when she pulled her hands free, the stains clung tighter, crawling higher like living shadows. And there, in the water's surface, the painted face stared back once more. This time, it spoke again, louder, resonant as though it came from beneath the earth. You made me ghost. Now ghost you shall be. The reflection's blackened lips moved, though hers did not. Its hollow eyes widened, burning with sorrow and wrath. The stepsister screamed, thrashing at the water, but the ripples only multiplied the faces, dozens of them staring, whispering, promising. The villagers who had followed stood at a distance, trembling. None approached. None helped. They only watched as the girl who had once laughed and smeared paint on another's face now clawed desperately at her own skin, crying for mercy. But the paint would not leave her. By dawn, she stumbled back into the village square, her hands black to the elbows, her face pale with terror. She no longer raised her voice. She no longer looked anyone in the eye. She only whispered to herself again and again, the words that had condemned her. Ghost, ghost, ghost. And the villagers knew, the curse had chosen its true vessel. By the time the sun rose, the whole village had seen the spreading stain. The stepsister's arms were black as coal, her fingers stiff as though carved from charred wood. Every door she touched was left marked, and the children ran from her in terror. Yet she herself wandered aimlessly, muttering to shadows, her eyes wild with sleepless dread. The elders called a council under the baobab tree. Their voices were low, but their fear was loud. This is no ordinary curse, one whispered. It began with paint, another muttered, but paint does not crawl nor stain the soul. It is her shame, the oldest elder said gravely, made flesh. Still they could not accept such words. They clung to rituals, desperate to undo what had begun. First they tried water. At the river's edge, the elders dragged the stepsister and plunged her arms into the current. They scrubbed with sand until her skin broke, until blood seeped into the water. But when she pulled her arms free, the black was still there, darker than before, gleaming like polished stone. Next they tried fire. A circle was drawn in the square, dry grass piled high. The villagers bound the girl's wrists and forced her to step inside, chanting prayers. The flames leapt around her, smoke curling into the sky. For a moment, hope sparked in their hearts. But as the fire licked her skin, the stains only deepened, glowing faintly as though the fire itself was feeding them. The girl screamed until her voice cracked, and when she staggered free, the marks had spread to her throat. Finally they tried prayer. All night the elders knelt, chanting before the shrine, their voices hoarse. They offered kola nuts, spilled libations, burned herbs. The village filled with smoke and incense, the air heavy with desperation. But the more they prayed, the more the stepsister wailed. Her cries pierced the darkness, echoing through every hut. And with each cry, villagers awoke to find small black smudges on their own hands, faint stains that no scrubbing could remove. By dawn, panic spread like wildfire. Mothers hid their children, men refused to work the fields, fearing the curse would follow them. Everywhere they looked, traces of black appeared, on doorframes, on water gourds, even on the ground they walked. The truth settled on them slowly, like a storm cloud. This was not paint. This was not something that could be burned, washed, or prayed away. It was something deeper, heavier than superstition, older than any chant. It was truth revealed. The girl they had mocked, the one they had driven away in cruelty, was gone. And in her absence, the forest, the river, and the sky themselves seemed to rise to defend her name. The stain was not punishment. It was memory. Every black mark was a reminder of what they had done, a mirror they could not wash clean. The elders bowed their heads beneath the baobab, their shoulders bent under the weight of their guilt. One by one their chants faltered and fell silent. The villagers gathered, silent too, the truth pressing on them heavier than the air before a storm. No one dared to laugh. No one dared to speak. For they knew, the curse was not something outside of them. The curse was who they had become. Years passed, but the village never healed from the shame it carried. The rains returned, the crops grew again, and laughter slowly found its way back to the square. Yet beneath it all, there remained a shadow no sunlight could erase. The story of the girl with the painted face became a warning whispered at dusk. Mothers told their children as they gathered around the hearth. Do not shame the innocent. Do not stain another's face with lies. For the stain will not rest. It will return to your hands and it will never leave. The children would glance nervously at their palms, turning them over in the firelight, half believing that black smudges might appear if they thought too hard of cruelty. Some swore they could feel the ghost of a chill across their fingers whenever the tale was told. By the river, where the girl had once tried to wash away the paint, strange things continued to happen. Fishermen returning at dawn spoke of handprints surfacing on the water. 5 black fingers, pulsing, spreading ripples across the current before fading away. Some claimed the handprints were alive, reaching upward, as though someone trapped below the water longed to drag the living into her silence. The elders never spoke of it openly, but they too had seen it. And when they gathered to pour libations at the river's edge, their own hands trembled, for each believed the stains they carried within would someday show on their skin. The stepsister lived on, but she was never the same. The blackness that had once clung to her palms grew deeper over the years, seeping upward into her arms, into the lines of her face. She covered herself with cloth, but nothing could hide the truth. Children screamed when she passed, men averted their eyes, and women whispered that she had become the very ghost she had once tried to create. Her voice grew weak and in time it disappeared entirely. Some said the curse had stolen her tongue, others said she had locked it away herself, afraid of what her own words might summon. She spent her days alone in the corner of her hut, rocking gently, her hands, forever black, pressed tightly against her cheeks. On stormy nights, villagers claimed to hear faint scratching sounds against their doors, like fingers dragging across wood. In the morning, black smears marked the entrances. No matter how much they scrubbed, the stains returned with the next rain. So the story grew. Travelers passing through the village heard it first as a hushed warning, then as a chilling legend. The tale of the painted girl, the cursed stepsister, and the hands that never washed clean. Some scoffed, calling it superstition. Others carried it with them, spreading it from one fire to another, until the girl's fate was known far beyond her village. And always the story ended with the same image. A hut lit faintly by moonlight. A figure crouched in the corner. And a pair of hands, black as night, black as sin, clutching at a face that would never again know peace. The villagers lived on, but they could not escape what they had done. For the stain was no longer paint, no longer curse, no longer something they could blame on spirits or shadows. It was their truth. And truth, once revealed, can never be washed away.